Hey guys, welcome back to the Life Mastery Podcast. I'm Joe Klemczewski here with Dr. Kori Propst. We are going to talk about something that is a little bit of a surprise to even Kori. I told her before we started that I'm going to go into her wheelhouse where I know she's going to be excited, but I want to surprise her. I don't want her to have all these thoughts ready to go. I want her unbiased, if that's even possible, just instant reaction to this. So Kori, I love talking about intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation because I think all of us are drawn immediately to the extrinsic, something that gives us an emotional reaction, pumps us up, we're excited about something. And I think those are great for that initial push into a behavior change. But if we don't make them intrinsic, if we don't tie them to something very, very deep and intrinsic, then they don't last. But I have a little twist for you. So not just the difference between intrinsic and extrinsic, but if we already just assume that intrinsic is there, we've shifted over to that side of the conversation, I think you can have positive and negative poles to those intrinsic goals. And let me say this as kind of a setup and then get your reaction.
Okay.
You know, on the negative side, you've heard of the disgust reflex, the insular cortex, the things that just make us revile. From an evolutionary standpoint, yeah, well, we know those, like that, you're right, that is tied to the olfactory system, the emetic center, the things that, smell horrible, make us vomit. But
I had some experiences like that on the plane this weekend.
Yeah. But what's interesting is when we are emotionally, and I almost don't want to use the word disgusted, but we're just not happy with something. We really do feel repelled. Yeah. Those same centers are activated. So it's why we dehumanize people when we want to attack them. It's why, like in Darfur, when there was ethnic cleansing, one group was calling the other group, cockroaches. And we know in the World War II whole Nazi phenomena, that same dehumanization was happening. So negativity is a powerful, just almost brain stem level motivation. And that is what I see most of all, Kori, in people who finally decide, I want to get in better shape. I want to lose body fat. I want to change my body composition. Clients will even say things like that. I'm disgusted with myself. I can't even look at myself in the mirror anymore. Mm-hmm. So there's that powerful initial impetus, but we know that a positive motivation actually lasts longer. So negative is powerful, positive is more permanent, but I think we can learn to use some of that negative, which we could even use externally, to get us to the more permanent positive parts of intrinsic. So if I was flow charting this for you, Kori, we already know there's intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. Now we're in intrinsic, but within those inside of us core emotional motivations, there are negative motivations and positive. Mm-hmm. So with all of that, as a very long introduction, what thoughts come to your mind between just the negative versus the positive? Is this even a conversation worth exploring?
Yes, it is, because I do agree with you that a lot of the drivers to moving into a change process come from pain, disgust, negativity, like being grossed out and just kind of fed up. I mean, you hear that a lot. Like, I'm fed up with feeling this way. I'm fed up. I'm sick of, like, all of those phrases come to mind for me. And I will say that I'm not so sure that intrinsic motivation necessarily has to revolve around positivity. What it more so needs to revolve around is personality, like making it very personal and weaved into our identities in some way. And not all of us are super positive people all the time.
But there is the positive element, whereas I can negatively say, I don't want to be fat and disgusting and out of shape. I can positively say, hey, I want to have abs. I want to be lean and athletic and healthy and feel good.
Yeah,
That's
I want more energy.
positive,
I want to
negative.
feel more vital. I want to sleep better. Yes.
But if we only focus on that, because in the past when we've talked about this, in terms of positive psychology and knowing your why, we were just at a Diet Doc new owner training this weekend with some amazing new fitness entrepreneurs. Mm-hmm. And this came up because among the new program owners we have, they all had some pretty good business experience. They're already in the fitness industry. Mm-hmm. And somebody brought that up, that when they talk to potential new clients or new members, they go into that, hey, what is your why? Let's get into that positive side. Or, your why could be negative. But that's what got me thinking about this, is that, I think, I don't know, it'd be 50-50. I think it'd actually be more toward the negative. But when people get to that point of exploring what their real deepest motivation is, mm-hmm. it can be one or the other, it can be both. But again, I think we could even make the argument biologically that the negative side is always most powerful. But I don't think that's as permanent, because as soon as I start making some progress, maybe I feel a little less disgusted with myself. So what makes me continue on? When I reach my goals, I don't necessarily have that negativity impact. So what makes me use positive motivation to continue the process?
So if you look at what intrinsic motivation actually is, and it operates on this continuum from a motivation where you're really lacking any high quality level of energy to move forward at all, and the impetus or the prompts are coming in from completely external sources, or the motivation is all based on external things. And on the far end of the continuum, the intrinsic is, I would do this just because it's enjoyable for the rest of my life. Like, I have weaved it into my identity. Like, and when people are asked, why do you do it? It's just like, because I do. Because it's so, it's just a part of their personality at this point. It's become so habitual and automatic. They just wouldn't know what to do without it.
That's true.
Hang on one second. I just want to say too, though, that consider how clients will take photos of themselves in the beginning and then progress pictures. And now they have their like new weight photos, like before and afters. Oftentimes they'll go back to that first photo to remind themselves of the pain and difficulty and negativity and disgust that they had then. And it's very aversive. And so there's a positive quality to going back to the negativity and re-experiencing that in some way. So to be able to say, to go into that comparison place, to say, God, no, I'm making the best decision, even though this is taking effort. And once it becomes intrinsic, it oftentimes doesn't even feel like it takes effort. So that's enhancing the ability to make it a long-term part of that person's life. But toggling between this is how it was and this is how it is now, and is it worth it? Is it still worth it? Has the quality of my life changed in a way that makes it now like necessary and normal?
And that's exactly where I was going to go. So I'm glad you shut me up and continued, because I do think even though people who you're assuming have succeeded, they look back at those pictures and they think back to something that is aversive. We're talking about a small percent of people who ever get there, because there's such high recidivism in weight regain that I'm trying to speak to the people who never even get there. What will take them to that point where it is more intrinsic? And I think what you said is exactly perfect, in that there is that toggling back and forth. And I even wrote some notes down. I graphed this out as I was thinking about it in terms of the positive and the negative pole. And we start with negativity. Most people start with this negative, aggressive, disgust reflex that we finally hit rock bottom. We're going to do something. That's a powerful motivation. Positive motivation is what will keep it more permanent. But eventually, when we get there and we feel better and better about ourselves and about our progress, then the negative impact is just less. So I think you almost have to kind of drag that along with you a little bit and remember, like you said, that it's still what got us in the game in the first place. So I think of it like this. We always talk to a client who gets to their end goal, and we say, okay, now you got to learn to be comfortable in a certain range. You know, you're gonna have vacations and holidays, and you're gonna go up a couple pounds and back down a couple pounds. You're gonna live in this range. Well, if you start getting to the top of that range and then you exceed it, and then you exceed it a little bit more, you have to know how to reignite a little bit, at least, of that disgust reflex to say, whoa, I'm not going back there. So I think both of these poles are important. But if we do think of it in terms of power and permanence, and we want to get away from the negative power toward the positive permanence, a lot of alliteration in there.
I know, I'm liking it.
You love those things, I know. You have like the 5 P's.
Remember it better.
Motivation, right.
So, okay, so what you are saying essentially is that as we move from this extrinsic, externally motivated sense of motivation to the intrinsic, like enjoyment, it's inherently has a lot of satisfaction associated with it. What we are doing is creating a new level of awareness with ourselves and what's important to us and what we value as we get closer and closer to making it intrinsically regulated. So here's where, like, if we're only operating from this place of like disgust and disappointment and discouragement, essentially all we're relying on at that point is like self-control and willpower, right? And rewards and punishments. And none of those things are associated with intrinsic motivation. Those are factors that are all related to a more kind of externally driven motivation. And that's not what is, I don't use willpower anymore in terms of being able to maintain my weight.
I would argue you do. It's just a much more comfortable, normal place for you.
Well, that's it. And I think, though, that's the mistake that a lot of people make is there's this gritting your teeth and white knuckling my way through situations. And that's not what I experience anymore. Because I've practiced, like, and become more aware of what's important to me in these situations. So there's this personal level of importance versus, am I doing this for my doctor? Am I doing it for my spouse? Or, has someone else told me that this is important? Am I doing it solely for my coach? Or is this in my best interest? And then there's putting ourselves in these progressively more difficult situations that you begin to notice feel easier and easier and less effortful.
And I think that's a perfect way to wrap this one up, because I know in our next episode, we're going to talk about something pretty related. But think of the analogy. What you just described made me instantly think of a swimming pool. So you've got the deep end. You got the shallow end, but then we've always been in that middle where it's like you hit that slope and it's like, oh my gosh, I'm sliding back into the deep end, and you start scrambling for the shallow end. So your metaphor or visual of white knuckling it and being hard, that's treading water in the deep end, and that's tough.
Tiring.
You're still in the pool, you're still in the water, but when you're in the shallow end, man, this is easy. I got it figured out. All of these things we're working on are to get people there, and where it's easier, but we're always going to have the danger precipitously of falling down that slope. And that's the negative side. So I know we've covered enough here. I don't want to get too deep into the things exactly that we've already talked about in terms of intrinsic versus extrinsic. But I wanted to just bring up the point that if you always view this on your journey, even when you've made it, you've hit that finish line, you're celebrating, that you can now settle in to that shallow end where you're comfortable, it's positive, it's fantastic, but keep your eye on that negative side, because you could slip back down in that deep end and end up having to redo a lot of that work. So we want to get you to the positive, more permanent side of intrinsic motivation, but there's a good sense of fear that I think we should all have to make us want to stay there.
Yes, because life changes. We don't live in a vacuum, right? The pool can become an ocean, and then there's a big storm with huge waves. And
tsunami could come into our backyard and pull us out and kill us all if we're not careful. So.
There it is.
All right, guys. So that's it. We're gonna continue this in the next episode. Kori's gonna talk about having some non-negotiables, some things, some behaviors that you're going to develop to make sure that you can stay in that shallow, positive place where you're just enjoying all of the fruits of your labor. So thanks for watching and listening. Kori, thanks for your expert advice, trying to make sure I'm staying in bounds here. And we'll catch you guys tomorrow.
Thanks, guys.